This ad hoc tribunal of the National Academy is now in session. President of the Academy presiding. You may proceed, Mr. Prosecutor.
Learned judges, my case is simple. It is based on the notion that all sequels are unnecessary, as evidenced by the movie franchise we have before us today. Hollywood makes sequel after sequel. They're not sharing original sci-fi stories. They're only interested in the money. These sacred truths are self-evident. The proper number of sequels is 0. Despite poor reviews and diminishing ticket sales, 20th Century Fox keeps advancing this insidious storyline in hopes of creating some kind of franchise.
Come to the point, Dr. Lenorius.
Movie Night charges that this story isn't worthy of a 5-picture series. It should have stopped at 1. No one could have possibly enjoyed Beneath the Planet of the Apes.
That's a lie!
Mind your tongue, madam.
With the tribunal's permission, allow me to expose this hoax by direct examination.
Proceed, Doctor, but do not turn this hearing into a farce.
Tell the court, Mr. Heston, why does our culture keep welcoming shitty sequels?
I know nothing of your culture. I admit that.
Of course he doesn't know why. He's responsible for it. Tell us, why do you consider this franchise, these apes, to be equal?
Some apes, it seems, are more equal than others.
Ridiculous. Why did you do a sequel? Why does the science fail to make any sense? Why does an entire Planet of the Apes only seem to have a single village? Huh? Ugh. I rest my case, Your Honors.
I've heard enough. I motion we get this episode started already.
A wise suggestion, Dr. Zaius.
Well, this tribunal will examine all the evidence presented here and in due course render its verdict. This hearing is adjourned.
And this is Movie Night. Hi, I'm Jonathan Paula, and welcome to Movie Night. Tonight I'll be reviewing the original 5 films in the Planet of the Apes series, and next week we'll take a look at their 21st century counterparts. But we've got to start at the beginning, so here's my review of Planet of the Apes. A monumental experience. Loosely based on the 1963 novel La Planète des Singes by Pierre Boulez, this science fiction action film was a smash success following its April 3, 1968 release, grossing around 6 times its $5.8 million budget. The G-rated production by director Franklin J. Schaffer follows an astronaut crew who crash land on a planet in the distant future where intelligent talking apes are the dominant species while mute humans are enslaved. Hollywood icon Charlton Heston brings his larger-than-life persona to the lead role as a headstrong and resourceful commander who finds himself stuck in one impossible and unbelievable situation after the next. Shot in the neck while being rounded up, his ape captors think he's another dumb, silent human, but when his vocal cords heal at the conclusion of a long chase, he's finally able to yell out,
"Take your stinking paws off me, you damn dirty ape!"
A triumphantly powerful moment that shocks the entire ape community and remains one of the best lines in movie history. But this scene arrives well past the halfway mark, as the apes aren't even introduced until a half hour into the 112-minute film. The opening act that sees Heston and his fellow ANSA astronauts fumbling through the desert searching for life are interesting and moody, but the film doesn't really turn a corner until we finally see those scary-looking gorillas on horseback.
What are you doing? Leave her alone, damn you! Where are you taking us? Damn you, you hairy scum! Shut up, you freak! Julius, you... I said shut up! It's a madhouse! A madhouse!
Roddy McDowall and Kim Hunter portray sympathetic chimp scientists who befriend the strange talking human, while Maurice Evans turns in a fantastic performance as the despicable and uncompromising Dr. Zaius. The narrative themes touch upon the prevalence of animal cruelty, the civil rights movement of the 1960s, and science versus religion, with Hunter asking, how can scientific truth be heresy? Indeed, it's hard to watch the courtroom scene of this film and not be frustrated at the leadership's stubborn refusal to listen to reason or truth, a reality that sadly parallels today's politics. But just when things get a bit too upsetting, there's an impossible to miss see no evil, hear no evil sight gag, which is nice. While the titular concept sure is a terrifying one, the movie unfortunately feels more like Village of the Apes, as only a single settlement is ever shown. This is not to say the scope of the film is unimpressive, however. Thanks to involved stunt work, award-winning makeup, and giant set design, it's obvious a lot of time, talent, and money were invested in creating this imaginative environment. Earlier, we're treated to some curious sound effect choices though, like a weird reverb on Charlton's obnoxious laughter, or a screeching scream heard when he discovers his female counterpart died in hyposleep. Visually, however, the film makes terrific use of the long Panavision frame, especially in wide group shots. Even if there are lots of distracting zooms, a technique popular in the 60s but one that feels particularly jarring today. Early work from Jerry Goldsmith mixes loud woodwinds and rhythmic percussion for a very lively, almost jungle sound. The atonal score also netted Planet of the Apes one of its 2 Oscar nominations. The other came for Morton Hack's memorable costume design. And since it wouldn't exist as a category for another 13 years, John Chambers was instead given an honorary Academy Award for his groundbreaking ape prosthetics and makeup. Compared to the rebooted trilogy of today, the apes here mayn't look very realistic, but they never look fake either. The chimps, gorillas, and orangutans resemble hairy humanoid hybrids instead, allowing you to occasionally forget you're just watching actors in funny masks. It's almost impossible to discuss this film without mentioning its unforgettable final twist, a moment that has been parodied and referenced countless times in the 50 years since this film's release. So I'm just going to go ahead and spoil it for the few who aren't already familiar. Heston discovering the Statue of Liberty half submerged in the sand might not make sense geographically or even metallurgically, why hasn't the copper statue eroded yet, but it is an incredible final image with haunting implications. The Planet of the Apes is Earth. It is an absolutely stunning reveal and one that warns of man's continued hubris, with Heston's frustrated accusatory screams closing out the film. The whole sequence feels like the ending of a great Twilight Zone episode. After 2,000 years, Earth would undoubtedly look slightly different, but even still, you'd think skilled astronauts would be able to recognize their own planet. The stars, sun, gravity, atmosphere, and temperature should have all been clues as to where they really landed. This minor character deficiency, coupled with slow pacing early on, are my only real gripes. The success of this movie not only made an indelible mark on its genre, it also inspired 4 direct sequels, a remake, a reboot trilogy, a short-lived television show, an animated series, comic books, a video game, and one hilarious fake musical in an episode of The Simpsons. Still remarkable and entertaining a half-century later, Planet of the Apes is a sci-fi milestone. And here's what the movie night audience had to say. Praising the story and the final twist, we all agreed this is a truly awesome film. Next up tonight, Beneath, the Planet of the Apes. An embarrassing follow-up. The second picture in the original Ape series was directed by Ted Post and managed to quadruple its $5 million budget, despite being totally unnecessary. Following the unexpected reception of the first film, this 95-minute sequel was quickly commissioned and released in May of 1970. But when your lead character has strong reservations about returning, and you've already blown the biggest twist in movie history, where do you even take the story next? Practically nowhere, as it turns out. The G-rated script follows James Franciscus, the sole survivor of an interplanetary rescue mission who searches for the only survivor of a previous expedition. But instead, he discovers a planet of talking apes and an underground city of telepathic humans who worship an atomic bomb. Sadly, much of the first hour of Beneath is just an accelerated retread of the first film. There's a crash landing, our hero is captured by apes, and then escapes with Zira's help. It isn't until Franciscus finds himself in a familiar New York subway station that things get interesting. Realizing he's on a planet dominated by talking apes, he mutters to himself, "It's a bloody nightmare." Unfortunately, so is this film. First off, we need to address Heston's absence, who only agreed to return on the condition that his scenes be shot within a 2-week period and his character be killed off. After appearing in a brief intro, he's pushed out of the way and replaced by James Franciscus, a guy who looks like Heston's stunt double. The film even references their strikingly similar appearance when Kim Hunter mistakenly refers to her new human friend by the old one's name. Awkward. His performance isn't necessarily bad, but without the charisma or presence of his taller counterpart, he just feels like a discount brand knockoff. At least Maurice Evans and Lena Harrison were able to return, even if they don't do anything we didn't already see them do in Part 1. Disappointingly, Roddy McDowall had prior commitments and was unable to appear as Cornelius, making this the only picture in the pentalogy that he does not appear in.
If you are caught by the gorillas, you must remember one thing.
What's that?
Never to speak.
What the hell would I have to say to a gorilla?
Oh, but you don't understand. Only apes can speak. Not her and not you. If they catch you speaking, they will dissect you and they will kill you in that order.
Cornelius is right. Be very careful. And get out of those things that you're wearing as soon as you can.
Thanks.
Thank us by finding Taylor.
Yeah, if he's still alive.
Unfortunately, this is another movie where I really must spoil the ending to provide context to my commentary. As it turns out, Heston's request to be killed off also included a suggestion as to how. "Why don't I just set off this bomb and destroy the world? That's the end of the sequels," he apparently told the producers. And so, Beneath finishes with one of the ballsiest and bleakest endings in the history of science fiction. Charlton Heston explodes Earth. The screen fades to white, and a heretofore unheard narrator describes that our green and insignificant planet is now dead. Wow. The ending doesn't redeem the film, but it's so definitive and ambitious, I actually kinda love it. Save for those final moments, this is a forgettable and unoriginal experience. It's honestly an accomplishment this movie didn't kill the franchise outright. Completionists will enjoy exploring more of the titular world, but casual viewers would be best served to skip over it entirely. Beneath the Planet of the Apes is a pointless repackage of its superior predecessor, and a meh film. Third tonight, my review of Escape from the Planet of the Apes. Completely different, but really fun. This Don Taylor sci-fi film earned more than $10 million more than its $2 million budget after its release in May of 1971. The more socially minded narrative follows a trio of talking apes who travel back in time to 1970s Los Angeles and shock the world with their intelligence and desire for equal rights. Roddy McDowall and Kim Hunter reprise their roles as the warm-natured chimp couple who find themselves experiencing a reversal of fortune of the original movie's plot. The result is an easygoing and more satirical story than the darker and serious films that came before. McDowall and Hunter are both fantastic in the lead roles, balancing their scientific curiosity with cautious hesitation remarkably well. They may be monkeys, but they end up being the most human characters in the entire film. Remarking on the deceitful nature of man, Hunter explains, "We've met hundreds. I trust 3. Okay, rant time. Where the hell did the monkeys get a time-traveling spacecraft anyway? In the first film, which takes place just a year prior, the apes don't even understand the concept of flight. Heston threw a paper airplane across the room and it blew their minds. And now they're piloting rocket ships? Okay, I get it. The writers, at Heston's behest, hey, that rhymes, painted themselves into a corner with that whole blow up the entire planet ending of the previous film. So going back in time prior to its destruction was really the only place a sequel could have gone. And since time travel was a major linchpin of the original movie, it's a reasonably fair plot device here. But to suggest that some random heretofore unseen monkey was intellectually or physically capable of retrieving and restoring a spacecraft from the bottom of a lake, given what we know about their relatively simplistic culture, is utterly preposterous. Even more frustrating is that all of this takes place off-screen. The opening scene twist is the literal foundation of the entire 5-picture series, but it is a completely unearned moment that insults the intelligence of the audience. Once you get past that monumentally frustrating twist, however, the scene itself is actually a pretty bitchin' way to open a film. Apes in spacesuits and some awesome music from Jerry Goldsmith. As for Sal Mineo, the new guy who's responsible for rebuilding the time ship, he's killed off almost as soon as he's introduced, reminding me of Marty McFly's line in the beginning of Back to the Future Part 2. Then what the hell did you bring him for? Elsewhere, Ricardo Montalban is featured in a small but pivotal role as a kind circus owner who immediately befriends the talking chimps. The 98-minute narrative delivers plenty of classic sci-fi what-if scenarios, from the stranger in a strange land moments to first contact procedures. The scene where talking apes testify in front of a presidential inquiry instantly makes Escape more enjoyable than the first lousy sequel.
What is your name?
Zira.
One might as well be talking to a parrot.
A parrot?
Mechanical mimicry, unique in an ape, vocally, without a doubt. But does the other one talk?
Only when she lets me.
It's also a scene that would have been particularly surreal for Academy Award-winning Hunter to play, being a former victim of Hollywood's House Un-American Activities Committee 2 decades prior. Later, the film pivots from playful wardrobe montages to a dramatic fugitive story with knee-jerk speed. The shift in mood is an abrupt one. And why does the film take place on the West Coast? The first 2 movies are set in the distant future version of New York, so it would have made sense to parallel that here, right? Instead, in what can only be attributed to the filmmaker's laziness, Escape takes place in present day, directly outside 20th Century Fox Studios in Los Angeles. Thanks to lasting imagery, this is easily the second best feature in the 5-picture series, but it's also tonally inconsistent and built on an unforgivable plot hole. Ultimately, Escape from the Planet of the Apes is a genuinely amusing and thought-provoking picture. It's a great film. Now let's discuss Conquest of the Planet of the Apes. Thin but compelling. Released in June of 1972, this science fiction action film from director J. Lee Thompson is the 4th film in the continuing Apes saga. Like each passing sequel in this series, the PG-rated film had its budget slashed even further to only $1.7 million, but it still managed an impressive $8 million in profit. In a futuristic world where humanity has embraced ape slavery following the extinction of all cats and dogs, Caesar, the talking ape child of 2 time-traveling chimps, surfaces after 20 years of hiding to lead a revolt against man. Roddy McDowall returns to the franchise in his 3rd picture to portray his own offspring, now stuck in a world dominated by humans who are unaware of his true intelligence. I was glad to see Ricardo Montalban return as well, in a much larger role, now functioning as Caesar's de facto father figure. He brings some much needed compassion and heartfelt sincerity to this film. Don Murray, Natalie Trundy, and Harry Rhodes round out the primary cast as a stern governor, an ape love interest, and a sympathetic ally, respectively. The first few minutes of dialogue here is nothing but clunky exposition, reminding newcomers of what happened in the previous films. For what it's worth though, thanks to Escape's ending, Conquest actually feels like a proper sequel, a film which builds off its predecessor, rather than recreating or spinning off somewhere else. And indeed, of the 5 films, the third picture was the only one intended to have a follow-up. Although Conquest of the Planet of the Apes is set in 1991, you can tell it's the future, since all the police officers are dressed like Grand Moff Tarkin and the PA system keeps warning about a labor dispute. The entire universe feels decidedly Orwellian, despite being rather clearly filmed at the University of California Irvine campus in the early 1970s. The narrative parallels to African-American oppression is obvious, but no less meaningful, with McDowell gaining sympathy from Rhodes, a black security guard, by suggesting, "You, above everyone else, should understand." It's obvious Caesar is a born leader, capable of leading a revolution, but Conquest does a genuinely poor job of illustrating how he actually accomplishes this and convinces his fellow primates to rise up. There's a scene where McDowell just begins looking at other chimps, and somehow they understand how to disobey their human masters and when, without any further explanation. The film desperately needed an extra scene showing Caesar functioning as something of a teacher, instead of just giving orders. A scene where he cleverly selects his own name out of a book, clandestinely telegraphs his impending defiance.
Say, we haven't named him yet, have we?
No, Mr. Brigg.
Well, I'm going to have to revive a charming tradition established in her lifetime by my dear wife, and let you name yourself. Caesar. A king.
From then on though, the 88-minute picture is really light on story developments. The last half hour is just one big, seemingly unchoreographed riot sequence. McDowell closes out the picture with a powerful monologue where he triumphantly marks the violent uprising as the birth of the Planet of the Apes, highlighting a real missed opportunity for the producers to name this picture accordingly. Despite this dragged-out final act and an accelerated plot that relies too frequently on convenience, Conquest of the Planet of the Apes is a worthy entry for the franchise with meaningful themes of racism and rebellion. I thought it was a good movie. Finally, here's my review of Battle for the Planet of the Apes. Out with a whimper. This $1.7 million sci-fi action film was led by returning director J. Lee Thompson and released on June 15, 1973, earning back around $7 million at the box office. Don't be misled by Battle's cool movie poster though, the 93-minute film was never that exciting. And how can it be? It's rated G. 10 years after the uprising scene in Conquest, ape leader Caesar wants both species to live in peace, but militant interest on both sides threatened the stability. When the Apes franchise began only 6 years earlier, no one could have guessed the timid little scientist with a British accent will go on to be the figurehead of the entire franchise. And yet that's exactly the mantle Roddy McDowall took up. He returns here for his 4th and final appearance as the pragmatic Caesar. By this point he's got the monkey mannerisms locked in, but the real benefit of his continued presence is just having a familiar face to root for, as mostly all other characters have been swapped out with analogs or replacements.
We're not your equals.
MacDonald, I believe that when you truly grow to know and trust a person, you cannot help but like him. Now, when we grow to know and trust your people, then we shall all be equals and remain so until the end of the world.
Which may be sooner than you think.
You are such a pessimist.
Or a prophet.
Well, now that apes are at the helm, Earth will sail safely through space until the end of time. And Virgil says, time has no end. So you see, I cannot believe you.
Natalie Trundy and Severn Darden both reprised their characters from Conquest, but they were tertiary players in that film at best. And while I appreciate seeing some of these returning characters, the timeline of this 5th movie just doesn't make any sense to allow it. It purports that all apes gain the intellectual capacity for speech and reason in a single generation, which runs in direct contradiction to the centuries of evolution explanation that was provided in the 3rd film. In the original, Charlton Heston accidentally found himself 2,000 years in the future, when it seems he could have just traveled to 2012 and achieved the same result. Notable newcomers to the cast include Paul Williams as a wise orangutan teacher who answers a riddle by stating, "All knowledge is for good, only the use to which you put it can be good or evil." and cinema legend John Huston as the mythical lawgiver ape, who bookends the movie by sharing its events in a flashback story. Hampered yet again by budget limitations, the titular events play out on a decidedly small scale in the nondescript setting of Malibu State Park, and what was once Academy Award-winning makeup now look like stiff rubber masks. Seeing the early beginnings of ape society, and the ending of man's, is reasonably interesting, but it's a curiosity that wears off quickly. When my father first showed me the Planet of the Apes films as a kid, we stopped at Escape. I don't know why, but I just never bothered to watch the final 2 installments until a couple weeks ago when I began preparing for these reviews. And while neither Conquest nor Battle are bad films, they're largely forgettable and uninteresting. They exist only to fill in the story we're already familiar with. We know what will happen and even how it will happen. This is merely an exercise in completion, and to fulfill the series' desire to come full circle with its dystopian roots. And while these two films are not without purpose, the story in each is thin enough that combining them into one bigger movie probably would have been best. I imagine when you create 5 movies in 6 years, you start to get a little punch drunk, though. Perhaps the most impressive accomplishment of the sequels is convincing audiences to root against their own self-interest, namely mankind itself. In the first film, we wanted humans to overthrow the apes, and now we're cheering on the apes to defeat the humans. Enjoyable for fans of the franchise, Battle for the Planet of the Apes isn't interesting or necessary enough to really recommend otherwise. I thought it was alright. That does it for part 1 of my Planet of the Apes reviews, but stay tuned next week to hear my thoughts on the Tim Burton remake and the new reboot trilogy. In the meantime, you can click or tap here to watch my reviews on Harrison Ford movies, click or tap here to watch my reviews of the Rocky franchise, or click the jogwheel icon below to subscribe and be notified of new uploads when they're released. Once again, my name is Jonathan Paula, thanks for watching, and have a good movie night.